Before we learn the specifics of how to write code for our programs, we'll take some time to try and get into the mindset of a programmer. Our goal in this video is to understand two concepts, variables and methods, and use them to translate from real-world things to our computer programs. A variable is used to store a piece of information in our computer. You've probably heard of the word variable before in algebra. Let's think about what it means in that context. If I had the expression x minus 7 equals 0, what does that mean? Well, it means x is some value which minus 7 is equal to 0. In other words, x is equal to 7. For our sake, we can think that x is storing the value of 7. That's what variables are. And using the naming conventions we learned earlier, we can make names or the identifiers of our variables more interesting than just x and y. If I had a program that needed to store information about my medical health, I could have variables like weight, height, eye color, hair color, and so on, and they would store the appropriate values, whether it's a number or a color or anything else. A method is a sequence of code that performs some task. For example, if I was still working on my health program, I could have a method that calculates my BMI, or body mass index. Your BMI is a way to measure body fat based on height and weight, and one simple way to calculate it is to take your weight in kilograms and divide it by your height in meters squared. So the method for calculating my BMI could do the following. It could take my weight, which is originally in pounds, and convert it to kilograms. It could then convert my height from inches to meters. Next, it would calculate my weight divided by my height squared and return that value. Methods are also called functions, which makes sense if you think about functions from math. If I had f of x equals x squared plus 4, this is a function that takes in an input value for x and returns an output value f of x. So if I plugged in x equals 2 as my input, an output of 8 would be returned by the function. Let's go back to my BMI method. What's the input in that case? Well, it's taking in my weight in pounds and my height in inches, so those are the two inputs, also called the parameters of my method. What's the output? Well, the method is returning the BMI, so that number is my output. Here's what the BMI method will look like in Java. Don't worry about the specifics yet, but let me show you why this is useful. Let's ignore this public static stuff, but we can see that this method is called BMI calculator, which makes sense since it calculates our BMI. Inside these parentheses, we have the inputs, or the parameters of the method, which are the weight in pounds and the height in inches. The first line of the program converts the weight in pounds, which again was an input or a parameter, to kilograms. The second line converts the height in inches to meters. The third line takes those two new values and calculates the BMI by dividing the weight by the height squared. This very last line of the method is the important part, the output. It returns the value of the BMI to the user. An important thing to keep in mind with methods is that they're reusable. Sure, I use this method to calculate my BMI, but notice how the actual code is very general. The parameters, or the inputs, are just given as variable names, not actual numbers. The calculations are all done with those general variable names, so you could plug in any values you wanted into the input parameters and you'd get the BMI. That's what's so useful about methods. They increase the reusability of our code. Let's go back to our math example, f of x equals x squared plus 4. Here, if I wrote f of 2, that would mean plug in 2 into the function and see the output, which in this case is 8. F of 3 would mean plug in 3 into the function and see the output, which is 13, and so on. Well, our BMI method wasn't called f, it was called BMI calculator. So if I plugged in values or called the method, I would get my output BMI value returned. For example, BMI calculator 160,66 passes in 160 as weight in pounds and 66 as height in inches into the BMI calculator, and it'll return the BMI value. I could plug in anything I wanted, like 180.72 or 145.64. That's why methods are so useful. Once you write it once in general with your parameters and calculations, you can use it as many times as you want, and you can plug in any value you want. In the next few videos, we'll look at some examples of devising algorithms or step-by-step procedures for our methods. You can think of algorithms and methods as recipes. They tell you step-by-step how to get the final product that you want. It can be as simple as the 3 lines of code we had for our BMI calculator, or, as we'll see in some of our examples, a little more complicated, especially if we need our program to make decisions. At the end of the day, the idea is the same. Methods are ways for us to write chunks of code in general that we can reuse in our programs, making us more efficient in our programming.